name is Thomas. A few years ago, I was desperate for money. Freelance IT guy, projects had dried up. Bills were piling up with terrifying speed. When I saw an ad for a temporary, very well-paid tech support team for an exclusive private event at a remote property outside the city, I didn't think twice. The host's name wasn't disclosed in the ad, just the high-end recruitment firm. It sounded too good to be true, but need spoke louder. I was hired along with a small team. Our instructions were clear. Ensure the entire mansion's Wi-Fi network, sound systems and projection setups worked flawlessly for a whole weekend. We'd be paid handsomely, have separate accommodations on the grounds, and above all, we were to be invisible. Absolute discretion was paramount. Ask no questions. Don't. Interact with guests unless requested, and keep our eyes down. The property was obscene, no other word for it. An imposing gate opened onto a long private road, winding through acres of meticulously manicured forest, culminating in a modern mansion of glass, steel, and dark stone that looked more like a luxury corporate complex than a home. We were taken to our quarters, a comfortable but clearly separate annex, and given our badges and final instructions by a severe, impeccably dressed woman, Mrs. Davenport, who seemed to be the estate manager. She informed us the host was Mr. Julian Thorne, a reclusive and absurdly wealthy tech mogul rumored about often, but with little concrete information available. The private event was a gathering of maybe 30 people, but these weren't ordinary people. I recognized some faces from financial news, industry titans, shadowy political figures, all carrying that air of effortless power and wealth that sets them apart from the rest of us. The atmosphere was strange. There was a cold formality even during moments of socializing. Few genuine smiles, lots of hushed conversations in corners, calculating glances exchanged over glasses of expensive champagne. Our job was mainly ensuring presentations and video conferences in a state-of-the-art conference room ran smoothly. But we also had to be on call for any tech issues anywhere in the mansion. It was during one such call on the first night that things started feeling off to me. I was summoned to check an unstable network connection in a wing further away from the main house, near an area Mrs. Davenport had specifically instructed us to avoid, the West Gallery. While troubleshooting in a small office in that wing, I heard something coming from the direction of the West Gallery. It wasn't music, not conversation. It was a kind of low, resonant chanting. It had a strange, repetitive rhythm and seemed to be in a language I didn't recognize. Not Latin, not anything European I knew. It lasted only a few seconds, then stopped. I felt a chill. I glanced down the dark corridor leading to the gallery. A heavy double door of solid wood was closed at the end. A cold feeling emanated from it. I fixed the network issue as quickly as I could and got out of there, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling. Later that night, I needed to access a central server located in a control room in the basement. Again, access was via a corridor that passed relatively close to that forbidden area, and again I heard something. This time, it was a different sound. A sharp crackle, almost like amplified static electricity, followed by a heavy, dense silence. And with the silence, I felt a wave of pressure. I don't know how to describe it. As if the air had suddenly become heavy, charged with an unknown energy. It lasted only an instant, then passed. But the sensation left my heart racing and my palms cold and sweaty. On the second day, the atmosphere in the mansion was even tenser. The guests seemed paler, more serious. There was an anticipation in the air, almost palpable. I was checking a projector in the main conference room when I overheard two of the tycoons talking quietly near the door. "Is the initiation ready for tonight?" one asked. "Thorne assures it is. The circle is complete. The cost will be high, but the return," the other replied, before they cut themselves off when they saw me. They shot me cold glances and moved away, Initiation, circle, cost, the words echoed in my mind. Combined with the strange sounds and the forbidden area, a disturbing picture began to form in my head. I decided I needed to know more, despite knowing the risks and the strict orders for discretion. Curiosity, or perhaps a dark premonition, won out. That night, the main event seemed to be happening in the central area of the mansion. The music was louder, there was more movement. It was my chance. I fabricated a non-existent issue with a signal booster in the West Wing, grabbed my toolkit, and headed that way, heart hammering against my ribs. The corridor was dark and silent. No chanting, no crackling this time. I approached the double doors of the West Gallery. I hesitated. This was stupid. It could cost me my paycheck, maybe worse. But I had to know. I turned the handle. Unexpectedly, it was unlocked. I pushed the door open gently, just a crack. What I saw made my blood run, cold, and my stomach churn. The West Gallery wasn't an art gallery. It was a large, circular space with dark stone walls. The air was cold and thick with a strange smell, ozone, like before a thunderstorm, mixed with something heavy and sweet, like sandalwood incense and dried blood. In the center of the room was an intricate circle drawn on the floor with some kind of shimmering powder or salt. Inside the circle stood Thorn and his inner circle of guests, perhaps 10 people. They weren't wearing cliché robes, but expensive suits and dresses, immaculate, except for masks covering the upper halves. Of their faces, masks of polished, expressionless gold, they stood motionless, facing the center of the circle. In the center there was no altar, but rather a low pedestal upon which rested a strange object, a black sphere made of a material that seemed to absorb light, pulsing with a faint, dark energy. Thorn stood with his hands outstretched over the sphere, speaking in a low voice, in the same guttural, unknown language I had heard the night before. As he spoke, the powder on the floor began to glow more intensely. The black sphere pulsed harder, and I felt that pressure in the air again, 10 times stronger, pushing me back. I saw one of the masked guests shudder, as if in pain, then relax, a sigh almost of ecstasy escaping from behind the golden mask. It looked like they were absorbing something from the sphere, or perhaps feeding it. I couldn't process everything, but the feeling emanating from that room was one of cold, ancient greed, an unholy exchange being made right there. Power, influence, wealth, being bought at an unseen cost, drawn from or fed to that dark sphere. This wasn't a business meeting, it was a ritual of power. With silent horror, I slowly closed the door, retreating down the corridor before anyone could notice the open crack. I returned to the main area of the mansion, trying to look calm, my face a mask of professional indifference, barely hiding the terror beneath. I finished my shift the next day in a state of quiet shock. Received my generous cash payment, along with a final warning from Mrs. Davenport about the importance of confidentiality. I left that estate as fast as I could, feeling the unseen eyes of the guests and Thorn on my back. I thought I was safe when I returned to my apartment in the city. I was wrong. The Gilded Circle, or whatever Thorn and his associates called it, didn't leave loose ends, or maybe I'd been affected just by witnessing the ritual. Strange things started happening. Important emails vanishing from my inbox. Freelance. Projects that were almost closed being cancelled last minute with no explanation. A constant feeling of being watched online, my devices acting strangely. And the worst, sometimes, when looking at dark, reflective surfaces, the turned-off computer screen, a window at night, I'd see a fleeting glint of gold, like the reflection of one of the masks. There were no direct threats. No one knocked on my door. But it was a constant, invisible pressure. A string of bad luck and difficulties that seemed too coordinated to be coincidence. It was as if the universe was subtly turning against me, crushing me financially and psychologically. Was this the cost I had heard mentioned? The price? For seeing what I shouldn't have, I have no concrete proof. Telling the police would sound like the paranoid fantasy of a broke man. I can't fight people with the kind of power and influence I saw in that room. They don't need to threaten me physically. They can simply erase me, financially, socially. I've moved cities, changed my name. I work a simple, low-profile job, always looking over my shoulder, always double-checking the shadows in reflections. The money I earned that weekend ran out long ago, but the real price I'm still paying. I live with the constant fear that the gilded circle hasn't forgotten me, that they're just waiting, watching, perhaps even amused by my slow, quiet decline. The glint of gold I sometimes see in reflections is a constant reminder of the unholy power I witnessed and the terrible cost of merely peeking behind the wrong door. Clara Rossi, an expert in ancient textiles, with a keen eye for details others missed, felt a mix of professional excitement and personal apprehension upon receiving the invitation. The commission was extraordinarily generous, almost suspiciously. So catalogue and appraise a private collection of medieval tapestries at the remote and near-legendary Blackwood Manor, home to the enigmatic and reclusive family matriarch Cecilia Blackwood. The Blackwood family was old, their fortune immense, their origins shrouded in whispers of ruthless business dealings and even darker rumours no one dared articulate aloud. The manor, it was said, stood isolated on a vast wooded estate, a Gothic monument to wealth and secrecy. The journey there confirmed the isolation. A narrow, poorly maintained road snaked through miles of dense, silent forest before ending at wrought iron gates bearing the Blackwood crest, a raven perched on a thorny branch. The manor itself was an imposing, sombre structure of dark stone, with turrets, gargoyles, and tall, narrow windows that seemed like suspicious eyes. The air was heavy, smelling of pine, damp earth, and an underlying sense of neglect, despite signs of impeccable maintenance. Clara was greeted by an elderly, taciturn butler named Hemlock, whose eyes seemed to have seen too much, and whose expression rarely changed. He led her through silent, dark, wood-panelled corridors where ancestral portraits with severe gazes seemed to follow her. Mrs. Cecilia Blackwood, Hemlock informed her in his monotone voice, was indisposed and would receive her. Later, Clara would be housed in a suite in the East Wing and given unrestricted access to the library and the gallery where the tapestries were kept. Discretion, he emphasized with a piercing look, was paramount. The suite was luxurious in an old-fashioned, oppressive way, with heavy furniture, velvet curtains, and an almost absolute silence. The library, where Clara began her work, was vast. The walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. The smell of old paper, dust, and beeswax was almost suffocating. The tapestries, kept in an adjacent temperature-controlled gallery, were magnificent. Scenes of hunts, battles, biblical and mythological allegories, woven with stunning skill. But as Clara examined them meticulously with her magnifying glass and special light, she began noticing strange details. In several of the older pieces, hidden in the ornate borders or subtly incorporated into background patterns, were symbols that didn't belong to the traditional iconography of the era. They were angular shapes, almost sigils, that seemed vaguely familiar from her research into esoteric orders and forbidden texts. She also found, in a dark corner of the library, a few rare volumes not listed in the main catalogue, grimoires, bound in unidentified hide, with annotations in the margins, in an old disturbing script, using ink that looked strangely dark, almost reddish-brown. A shiver ran down her spine. What kind of collection was this, exactly? Finally, on the second day, Clara was summoned to Cecilia Blackwood's presence. The matriarch received her in a private drawing room, seated in a high-backed armchair like a throne. Cecilia was a woman of indeterminate age, perhaps 80, perhaps older, with white hair pulled back in a severe bun, incredibly dark and piercing eyes, and pale, almost translucent skin. She wore black silk and antique jewelry that gleamed discreetly in the room's dim light. Her presence was magnetic and deeply intimidating. "Miss Rossi," Cecilia said, her voice surprisingly firm, though quiet. "I trust you are finding our little collection instructive." There was a faint smile on her thin lips that didn't reach her eyes. "It's extraordinary, Mrs. Blackwood," Clara replied, trying to maintain professional composure. "One of the finest preserved I've ever had the privilege to study." "Preservation is everything, wouldn't you agree?" Cecilia murmured, almost to herself. "Some things, some legacies, require constant care, lest they unravel." Her gaze seemed to fix on something beyond Clara, a cold intensity gleaming in her dark pupils. The conversation was brief, formal. Cecilia asked a few technical questions about the tapestry's condition, but Clara got the unnerving feeling the matriarch already knew the answers, that this was just a test or a formality. As she left the room, she felt Cecilia's gaze on her, back cold and appraising. That night, Clara decided to work late in the library. There was one tapestry in particular, the oldest and most enigmatic of the collection, that intrigued her. It depicted a night scene in a dark forest, with strange hooded figures gathered around a gnarled tree under a stylized moon. The symbols in the borders were more prominent on this piece, and the very texture of the thread in certain areas felt different, almost organic. She was so absorbed in her analysis, making feverish notes in her sketchbook, that she lost track of time. When she finally glanced at the clock, it was past 2 in the morning. The manor was utterly silent, or almost. It was then she heard it. A low, rhythmic sound coming from somewhere below her, perhaps the ground floor or the basement in the west wing of the manor, an area Hemlock had subtly discouraged Clara from exploring. It was a kind of chanting or intonation. The voices were deep, resonant, and the melody was repetitive, almost a hypnotic drone. It sounded like nothing she knew. Professional curiosity mixed with a growing fear spurred her on. She turned off the library light, leaving only her small work lamp on, and moved silently to the door. The corridor was dark. The chanting was definitely more audible here, seeming to drift up from a service staircase or a nearby ventilation. Ducked. Against her better judgment, Clara followed the sound. She descended a narrow, dusty staircase leading to a basement corridor she hadn't known existed. The air here was cold, damp, and the smell of earth and mold was strong, but mixed with something else, a metallic tang like copper and the heavy, sweet scent of some kind of burning incense. The chanting was much clearer now, and seemed to be coming from behind a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. A faint, flickering light escaped from beneath the door. Heart pounding wildly, Clara approached. There was no peephole, but there was a small crack in the old wood near the hinges. She hesitated for a moment, the danger of the situation screaming in her mind. But the need to know, to understand the secrets of this house and this family, was stronger. She leaned in and peered through the crack. The room beyond was a crypt or subterranean chapel, the walls rough-hewn stone. Black candles cast dancing shadows. In the center stood a group of perhaps 6 or 7 people, including Cecilia Blackwood and the butler Hemlock. They wore simple dark robes, no masks. They stood in a semicircle, facing the wall opposite the door, and on that wall hung a tapestry. Clara recognized it instantly. It was the oldest piece from the collection, the one of the dark forest. But here, in the candlelight, it looked different, alive. The shadows in the tapestry seemed to writhe, the hooded figures seemed to subtly shift. Cecilia stood facing the tapestry, hands raised. She intoned words in an ancient, harsh language that made the hairs on the back of Clara's neck stand on end. The metallic smell was stronger here. Clara shifted her gaze to the floor in front of the tapestry. An intricate pattern was drawn there with salt or ash, and in its center sat a shallow silver basin. The contents of the basin were dark and glistening in the candlelight, blood. And beside it, on a black velvet cloth, rested an obsidian ritual dagger. No one was being obviously sacrificed right then, but the implication was clear. The ritual involved blood, and it seemed focused on the tapestry. As Cecilia chanted, Clara watched in horror as the threads of the tapestry seemed to darken and shimmer, especially in the area of the gnarled tree. It was as if the tapestry were drinking the energy of the ritual, or perhaps it was a portal. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. Cecilia lowered her hands. A heavy silence fell over the crypt. Clara held her breath, her eyes still glued to the crack. Cecilia turned slowly, her pale face an unreadable mask in the candlelight. Her dark eyes swept the room, and for one terrifying instant, they seemed to land directly on the crack where Clara hid. Panic seized Clara. She jerked back from the door abruptly, bumping into something in the dark corridor. An old tool or bucket left there, which fell with a metallic clang that echoed terribly in the silence. She didn't wait to see if the door opened. She ran back up the dusty stairs, up to the relative safety of the library, and from there to her suite, locking the door behind her. She spent the rest of the night awake, huddled in bed, listening to every creak and groan of the old manor, expecting Hemlock or Cecilia herself to come knocking at any second. But no one came. The next morning the sun seemed weak and distant. Clara packed her things with trembling hands, eager to leave. When she came downstairs, Hemlock was waiting in the entrance hall with a thick envelope. The payment. Mrs. Blackwood. "And thanks you for your services, Miss Rossi," he said, his voice as emotionless as ever, "and hopes your stay was fruitful." There was an almost imperceptible glint in his eyes that made Clara shiver. Cecilia Blackwood did not appear to say goodbye. Clara didn't ask. She just took the envelope and left that dark manor and its terrible secrets as quickly as she could. The drive back was a blur. She drove straight home, locked herself in her bright, modern apartment, trying desperately to erase the images of the crypt, the living tapestry, the blood in the basin, Cecilia's eyes. The commission money felt dirty, tainted. She tried to resume her normal life, but the experience at Blackwood Manor had marked her. She had vivid nightmares of dark forests, guttural chants, and writhing tapestries. She started seeing the strange symbols she'd noted on the tapestries in random places. Graffiti on the street, a pattern in fabric, the way shadows fell on a wall. And there was something else, a persistent feeling of cold, even on warm days. And sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she caught a fleeting impression of a dark shadow behind her, a shadow that shouldn't be there. It wasn't paranoia, she felt. It was a connection, as if, by witnessing the ritual, something had latched onto her, a fragment of the darkness the Blackwoods had cultivated for generations to maintain their legacy. Clara never accepted another commission on an isolated estate. She continues her work, but there's a shadow over it now, a constant fear of what might be hidden behind ancient beauty. She doesn't know the exact purpose of the ritual, nor what entity they contacted through that ancestral tapestry, but she knows she saw something unholy, something that feeds on secrets and blood to perpetuate power and wealth. And she fears that somehow she is now part of that dark legacy, marked by a darkness that may never fully leave her. My name is Liam, and music was the only thing that made sense in my life. It was my air, my food, my obsession. But passion doesn't pay rent, especially in a city where thousands of other talented guys are playing in empty bars for peanuts and a warm beer. I was at my limit. playing any dive that would have me, eating instant noodles almost every day, watching my dream dissipate like smoke. It was at this low point that the opportunity arose, bright and too unbelievable to be real. Received an email from an ultra-exclusive event agency. They were looking for a solo musician, guitar and vocals, acoustic and atmospheric style, which was exactly my niche, to play background music at an intimate and private gathering in the penthouse of a certain Mr. Alistair Finch. Alistair Finch. The name was legendary in the music industry. A Midas touch producer, a talent scout with an almost supernatural knack for turning unknowns into global stars overnight. The fee offered for a single night was more than I made in 6 months. Obviously, I accepted immediately, heart pounding. With a mix of disbelief and wild hope, the penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a mirrored skyscraper in the city's financial heart. It was a place of cold minimalism and absurd wealth. White marble, infinite glass, contemporary art worth more than my entire apartment building, and a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. I was greeted by Finch's assistant, a tense young man with a tablet, who led me to a small stage set up in a corner of the main lounge. The instructions were simple. Play my most melancholic and atmospheric songs, don't interact with the guests, and be ready to stop or continue at any signal. The guests began to arrive. Maybe 20 people. I recognized some faces. A famous actor who had recently resurrected his career. A pop singer whose debut single had exploded out of nowhere. A fashion designer who was the latest sensation. They all shared that glow of recent success and an aura of belonging. They greeted each other with discreet nods, knowing smiles, like members of a very exclusive club, and they all seemed to gravitate towards Alistair Finch. Finch was exactly like the rare photos that existed of him. Tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost my annual rent, perfectly styled grey hair, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. He moved through the room with a predatory calm, an enigmatic smile on his lips. I started playing. The music flowed, my sad melodies filling the luxurious space. I tried to concentrate, but it was hard not to watch. The conversations were strange. No one talked about music, movies, or fashion. They spoke in vague terms about returns, investments, the next cycle, the price of a cent. And everyone seemed to be waiting for something. There was an electric tension beneath the party's polished surface. During a break they signaled me to take. Finch approached. His gaze assessed me for a moment, intense. "Liam, correct?" he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You have talent, a raw melancholy that's rare, commercial if polished correctly." My heart leaped. Alistair Finch was complimenting my music. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. That means a lot coming from you." "Alistair, please." He smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Talent is just the beginning, Liam. What really matters is ambition. The will to do whatever it takes to break out of obscurity. Do you have that will?" The question hung in the air. "More than anything," I replied, my voice slightly choked with emotion and sudden hope. "Good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, with a touch that felt oddly heavy. "Perhaps we'll have a chat later. Keep playing." He walked away, leaving me with sweaty palms and a spinning head. I continued playing, but my mind was racing. Was this my chance? The big break? But something still bothered me. The party's atmosphere, the veiled conversations, the underlying tension, and I noticed the details. Strange symbols, discreetly etched into the brushed metal coasters. A subtle odor in the air beneath the guests' expensive perfume, something like burnt sulfur and ozone. And the way everyone seemed to be wearing jewelry with dark, almost black stones that seemed to absorb the light. The intimate gathering went late. Around 2 a.m., most of the guests gathered around Finch. He clapped his hands softly, and the ambient music stopped. "Friends, colleagues," he said, his voice resonating in the sudden silence. "The hour approaches. Those who participate, please accompany me to the observatory. About 15 people followed Finch towards a mirrored door I hadn't noticed before. The tense assistant approached me. Your part here is done for tonight, Mr. Liam. Payment will be transferred. There's a car waiting downstairs for you. Normally, I would have left ecstatic with the promise of payment, but curiosity, the hope Finch had instilled, and a deep feeling that something important, and perhaps dangerous, was about to happen, made me hesitate. Mr. Finch mentioned we might talk later, I ventured. The assistant looked uncomfortable. I'm afraid Mr. Finch is occupied now, in a very private meeting. I understand, I said, trying to sound casual. I just need to use the restroom before I go. It was a flimsy excuse, but the assistant was eager to get rid of me and just pointed towards a hallway. Instead of going to the restroom, I ducked around a corner and hid in a dark alcove, watching the mirrored door the group had passed through. What was the observatory, and what kind of meeting happened at 2 in the morning? I waited a few minutes until I was sure the corridor was empty. I approached the mirrored door. No visible handle, just a smooth surface. I ran my fingers over it and felt a small, biometric sensor. Obviously, I couldn't get in, but I noticed a ventilation grill near the floor. I crouched down. I could hear muffled voices coming from inside, and I could feel a strange vibration in the air, a low-frequency hum. I pressed my ear to the grill. The voices were a monotonous chant in a language that sounded ancient and dissonant, mixed with the low frequency. And beneath the chanting, I heard Finch's calm, controlled voice. And so we offer the echo of unrealized potential, the shadow of frustrated ambition, to feed the flame. May their failure be our fuel. May the fame they never reach light our path. Unrealized potential, frustrated ambition, echo, fuel. What the hell was this? A chill ran through my body. This wasn't a meeting, it was a ritual that seemed to feed on the failure and broken dreams of others, like me. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. I heard Finch's voice again, louder, closer to the door. The newcomer. Bring him. My blood ran cold. Newcomer? Were they talking about me? How did they know I was there? Before I could react, the mirrored door slid silently open. 2 tall men dressed in the same expensive suits, but with empty expressions, stepped out and grabbed my arms before I could even think of running. They dragged me into the room. The observatory had no telescopes. It was a circular room, the walls made of dark glass, displaying the glittering city below like a carpet of diamonds. But the glass also seemed to contain the dark energy pulsing. In the room, in the center, Finch and the others stood around a circle drawn on the floor, with lines of light that shifted color. In the middle of the circle floated a distorted, 3-dimensional image. It looked like a cluster of silently screaming faces, constantly writhing and dissolving. The smell of ozone and sulfur was strong. Liam, Finch said, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes spreading across his face. So glad you could join us. We were just discussing potential. What is this? I stammered, trying to pull away from the men holding me. This, Finch gestured to the floating image, is the raw material, the residual energy of broken dreams, unfulfilled ambitions. So many artists, musicians, creators who come so close, but never make it. We simply channel it, put it to good use. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You steal their luck? Their energy? I asked, horrified. We recycle, Liam. Efficiency. It's the key to success, said the famous actress, her voice strangely flat. We all made the choice, offered a small initial sacrifice to join the circle, and then we just reap the benefits. Finch stepped towards me. We saw your potential, Liam, your ambition. You have the raw material to be great, but why fight for scraps when you can have it all? The circle has an opening, a unique opportunity for you. He held out his hand. All you need to do is contribute. Offer something of yourself to initiate the cycle. A bit of your own original creative spark, perhaps. Or even easier, think of someone you know, another struggling musician. Offer his ambition to us. Just a name, a symbolic sacrifice to seal the pact. In return, fame, wealth, power, everything you've ever dreamed of. His gaze was hypnotic. The floating image in the center of the circle seemed to pulse in response, the silent faces writhing. For a moment, the temptation was almost overwhelming. The end of the struggle, guaranteed success. But the image of the faces, the coldness in the eyes of Finch and the others, the smell of sulfur. "No," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. I can't do that." Finch's smile vanished. His eyes turned hard as ice. A pity, a waste of potential. He nodded to the men holding me. The hum in the room intensified, becoming almost painful. The floating image seemed to expand, surging towards me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. There was no physical pain, just an overwhelming sensation of emptying, as if something vital was being ripped out of me, sucked into the hum, into the floating image. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, an eternity, and then it stopped. The pressure subsided. The men released me. I collapsed onto the smooth, cold floor, gasping, feeling hollowed out. "No one rejects the circle and leaves unscathed, Liam," Finch said calmly. "You didn't want to give us another's potential, so we took some of yours. Or rather, we inverted it. Consider it a parting gift." He turned away. "Take him away, and make sure he forgets the way back." I was dragged out, barely conscious, and dumped in a service elevator. I woke up hours later in a dirty alley miles away, my wallet gone, my phone smashed beside me. I managed to get back to my miserable apartment, feeling violated and strangely empty. In the following days and weeks, I realized what Finch meant by inverted. I picked up my guitar to play, to try and exorcise the horror through music, but what came out was wrong. The melodies that were once melancholy now sounded dissonant, grating, causing physical discomfort in listeners. I tried writing lyrics, but could only produce words of anger and ugliness. I tried playing at a bar. People winced, covered their ears, walked out. My music, my only passion, my only escape, had become repellent. My voice, which used to have a warm melancholy, now sounded harsh and irritating. They didn't kill me. They didn't threaten me directly. They did something worse. They took my dream, my talent, the only thing that defined me, and twisted it into a curse. The fame and success I craved are now impossible, actively repelled by the very art I try to create. The gilded circle let me go, but they took my musical soul in the process. Now I live in a silence broken only by the awful music I'm condemned to create, a walking testament to the true cost of brushing against the dark rituals of the powerful. They have their fame, their wealth, and I have this, an inverted talent, a dream turned nightmare.